what do I mean by texture overlays? Well, let's I have 4 images here that we'll work on. These are the same images that we worked on in the previous webinar. And then I'll also just show you 2 different ways to get your own textures into PhotoFrame so that you can use them going forward. So let's just work on one image now, and then maybe we'll segue into the other lesson of getting one of the textures in. So here I am. I'm in Photoshop CS5. I normally use Lightroom, but for the purposes of this webinar, we didn't really need to go into any Lightroom process because all I did was export these images. So this is an HDR image. This was taken outside of Portland, Oregon. This is Crown Point, I believe. Right behind Crown Point, if you were to walk to the other side of this structure, you would see the Columbia River Gorge. Absolutely gorgeous landscape view. Just beautiful expanse of this river that carved through mountains and created this wonderful gorge. And so perched atop this path or this road is this kind of like vista, this lookout. And I really, really enjoyed it. And so I shot some brackets and I processed it, like I said, as HDR. And this image was already run through Photo Tools. The only other thing I did to the image was I made a selection around the sky, and I used a very, very slight blur. It was a radial blur to give the impression that the clouds were streaking towards you. And that's a little trick that I'm going to implement in a future webinar when we do some more HDR webinars. Like we were very heavy in February with HDR webinars, and so I wanted to tone it back a little bit for March, but they're not going away. We're just going to, I want to refine some of the lessons so it's not the same thing over and over again. But I figure showing you how to kind of add motion to your clouds without using a neutral density filter could be a cool little tip, because I see a lot of great photographers utilize that in their own images, and it worked well here. So what do I mean by applying a texture overlay just without really any intent? Well, what I mean by that is, like, let's say we go back here and I've got 2 textures that I shot myself. I have this image right here. This was taken in, I was in Worcester, Massachusetts. Just a couple of weeks ago, my friend was in town from Seattle, and we were just walking around. And I do this a lot, and I recommend you guys do this too. When you're out shooting, if you see something cool like this was just a wall, and it had some, obviously, I assume that they were trying to paint over some graffiti. So you can see this disparity in color and tone of the paint, but it has a lot of nice texture to it. And so I just took a picture of it, nothing special. What I can do is I can use this as a texture overlay. I can put this on top of another image. But for me, when I see random texture application that doesn't really do anything to, I guess, enhance the image, it just turns me off, because it's like you're just trying to apply actually, this image is a good kind of anecdote or a good analogy for it. It's almost like you're just trying to apply a cheap coat of paint on top of your image. So this is what I mean by that. Let's take this image, let's bring it into Photoshop. And so I'm going to show you pretty much the most basic way to get a texture onto your image. So you can see here, we have in Photoshop CS5 this texture, and on this tab we have the image. So if I take this image and I go to select all, it makes a selection. And now with my move tool, I can drag it onto this tab here. And what I'm going to do is, before letting go of the mouse, the left button of the mouse, I'm going to press the Shift key on my keyboard. By pressing the Shift key and letting go, it'll fit this texture to the image, so it fills the entire image. Now let's undo that, and I'll show you what happens if we don't. So now I'm just going to, again, move it to this image here, and I'm not going to hold the Shift key. In this case, actually, not unfortunately, fortunately, it works. If the image was smaller, though, then these 2 images are the same exact resolution. If the image was smaller, it wouldn't fit to the background image. So you'd have just a portion of the image covered, and then you'd have to stretch it out. By pressing and holding the Shift key, it'll stretch it out automatically and fit it to the frame. So it just saves you a step. Now, you can see in our layers palette, we have the texture on one layer and we have the image on the layer below it. So what you can do now is start blending. You have these various blending options right here under your layers palette. It's right here, right below layers. And there's an easy way to kind of cycle through them. If when you have your move tool selected, if you hit Shift plus, you'll cycle through all of the different blend modes. You could just go to any one of them and select it, but Shift plus and Shift minus with the move tool selected cycles through all of them. So it's kind of a cool way, a quick way to just see what the blending options are. So you can see how with the blending options, it's taking the texture layer and it's blending it based on whatever the blending method is on top of the background layer. And so this is what I mean. Like I see a lot of this. People just find a blending mode that they like. So this is, we're not really doing much here. Now we started over. A lot of times I'll see multiply being used or darken or lighten. And there's nothing to, all it does is just kind of, to me, it doesn't do anything for me, to be fair. It just doesn't. So let's use PhotoFrame, which is part of the Perfect Photo Suite, to kind of add textures and overlays with effect and with intent. So let's delete this layer for now, and I'll close this image for now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to toggle my onOne palette so you can see all the products. So here are all the products, and if you don't know how to get to to get to this panel here, you can get to it in Photoshop by going to Window, Extensions, and then selecting onOne. You can also get to our products by going to the File menu in Photoshop, going to Automate, and then selecting any one of the products here. So we can go into PhotoFrame 4.6 since we're here. And what we're going to do is we're going to find some sort of texture overlay that works for this image. Let me just maximize this window. All right, well, when you get into PhotoFrame, the first thing that'll happen is your library will pop up. And this is the library of elements that come with PhotoFrame. And you can see that on the left, we have these categories. And we break them down, either by the style or by what it is. So in this case here, we have a textures overlay category, and it's filled with subcategories. And so what you can do is, when I was designing the curriculum for this particular series, I was finding images that I thought could use some sort of an overlay, and then I would click on this textures overlay category, and I just scroll through. Nothing else. I would just kind of scroll through, and I'd look to see if there's a particular effect that I like that's being created. Because the nice thing about PhotoFrame, as opposed to Photoshop, is you can get a live preview of every single element in PhotoFrame and how it interacts with your image. So to save time, I remember under the clouds palette, I have these clouds here, and I'm liking basically what it's doing here. I see these different elements and I'm like, all right, do any of these look like they can fit into the sky? And if these are too small for you, if you can't see them, right below the thumbnails is this slider called the thumbnail size slider. So if you bring it over to the right, it makes the thumbnails larger. So it makes it a little bit easier for you to see what's going on. And so we can scroll down, and I like the way this one looks. And so I can hit Add Frame. Let me just maximize this window so we can see it. Now, what we have here is we have these clouds, but it appears in the entire image. And to that point, I don't want it to appear around this entire image, but we can take care of that in Photoshop. But before we do that, I want to add one more. I want to add something else to the image. And so what I did was, I'm not worried about masking out in here because you see this options panel. If you don't know how to get to this options panel, you can go to a window and then toggle this hide or show options. It's important that you select this second radio button called apply each frame to new layer. Because right now, if we just had one element, which are the clouds, it wouldn't really matter because it would apply to a layer. But let's say we go here and we open the library and we find, say, under the gurus category here, we have some of our friends who have built content for us. And let's say I go to the Dave Cross subcategory. Dave's, the resident Photoshop expert at NAPP. And I just scroll through here and I look to see, I kind of want to add a frame to this image. And I do like this first one. So if I hit add frame, it'll add the frame. And now I'm free to basically adjust the size. I can stretch it out a little bit if I don't want it that far into the frame. I can also adjust the opacity. But here's the important thing that I want to make, the point I want to make for adjusting opacity. So opacity, if I drop it, it becomes semi-transparent. You can see how you're starting to see the background. I personally never really touch opacity in PhotoFrame, and I'll explain why once we hit apply. But some of the other cool things that we can do here in PhotoFrame, let me make this 100% opacity, is you see this little color dropper? Let me bring this into the frame a little bit better so you can see. Okay, this color dropper right here. If I select it, I can sample from any color in this image, and the frame that you see here is selected on our layer will take that color. So if I want it to be really bright, I could select a bright color. Or in most cases, I think frames look really well when they're darker. You could sample a darker color. And you can keep sampling just by clicking, and it'll take on the color that you click. And the nice thing is that this adds a little bit of consistency to the image. You could just go pure black. That's not a problem. And even if you do go really dark, I sometimes like sampling whatever the darkest color is from the image because there is some sort of visual consistency. So we can even go here to this really dark. Now, I'm going to cancel out of this because to save, if I hit apply, PhotoFrame will go ahead and put this element on one layer and the clouds on another layer. But to save time, I already have them on their own layers. I'm going to cancel out of here, and you can see that we have the clouds on one layer and the frame on its own layer. Now, remember when I mentioned that I like to leave the opacity at 100% in PhotoFrame? The reason for that is if I dropped the opacity to say 50% in PhotoFrame, when PhotoFrame renders in Photoshop, this layer, this cloud layer, would be at 100%, but that 100% would only actually be 50%, if that makes sense. Here, if I leave it at 100% in PhotoFrame and I drop it down to 50% in Photoshop, I have total control. So I can control opacity in Photoshop. So what does this mean here? What am I doing differently? You're looking here and you say, oh, well, you just applied a cloud layer to the entire image. That's no different than what you were just saying before. Well, I like how the clouds appear in the sky. And the nice thing is that when you apply a texture overlay, PhotoFrame creates a layer mask for you. So what this allows me to do is select a brush, make sure black is my foreground and that my opacity is 100%. And now I can paint out the cloud effect. And so I'm just going to speed this up only because, and I'm not going to be very neat because I don't want to spend too much time showing you how I fail miserably at drawing. But the point that I want to make is, as I draw, you can see that my layer mask is showing me what I'm removing. And so this is what I mean by intent. Applying textures with intent is controlling what texture you apply, that it makes sense. So in this case here, look, if I turn this off, the sky is cool. It's very, very cool, but I feel that by adding clouds to it, you still get, and even we can, if we want, we can drop the opacity a little bit. But we're getting a little bit more of a dramatic look with these cloud shapes because you're getting motion through them. Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate the compliment. Um, and so that's what we're getting at here is by just removing, and you can see we painted out the sky a little bit here. So to restore it, all you need to do is change your color from black to white on the mask, and you can paint it back. Now I've got a little bit of feathering, so that's why it's not painting from the edge of the circle. I'm not worried about this. I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on it. But here's another cool little tip. If you want to see what you've masked out on the image, above the Enter or Return key on your keyboard on Mac or PC, you should have a backslash. It should be backslash and the pipe, which is a vertical line. If you press that, you'll get this overlay here, and you'll be able to see what you're missing. So you want to make sure that the entire image has that solid shade. Whatever is has a color overlay over it has been masked out, and you know that you don't have your. And this is a good way to make sure that you didn't miss anything. So again, it's the backslash key, which is above the Enter key. So let's just say that we spent the right amount of time and masked that out. Now what we can do is apply the frame, and in PhotoFrame, we were able to control the positioning. We were able to stretch it out a bit. You can do that in Photoshop as well. If you highlight the frame and then go to Edit and then select oops, I don't want that. I want Free Transform, which is Command or Control T. Command T on a Mac, Control T on a PC. You can now kind of stretch it out if you want the frame to kind of go a little bit closer towards the edge. And stretch it out here. Stretch it out there. And the nice thing is that it's got semi-transparent elements. When you're done with your free transform, you hit the checkbox to commit that transform. And if you decide that it's too harsh, you can drop the opacity of it if you want. Or you can mask this entire part out if you just like what it's doing to the bottom here. You have total control. I don't often apply frames just because I feel that textures are one thing, frames are another. Frames are great if you're looking to kind of finish up your image and you want to hang it somewhere. You want something to have it fit inside the frame of an actual, like a physical frame. You print your image and you want to put it in a frame. Having this frame here almost acts like an inner bezel in a way. So, Gail, the backslash key, this backslash key to show the mask, wherever you have a mask, is for Photoshop, not for PhotoFrame. So that's where you would use it to see what you're removing or adding. So you can see, now we can even go to the texture here, and let's see, maybe we can add an adjustment, a levels adjustment, and darken it. So now we're just acting on the cloud texture. We're not affecting the rest of the image. So you can see how the clouds got darker. So if you want to add a little bit more drama to the scene, you can. You can also boost the highlights, and you can adjust the midtones. So there you go. I mean, they're cool. It's not just to take it or leave it. So let's close this out. We'll work on a different image now. Let's work on my buddy Jacob. Jacob is currently in Whistler skiing in Canada, so I am jealous of him. But this is a picture that I took of him this past September at Photoshop World. We were out in Vegas, and for those of you that will be attending Photoshop World in Vegas this year, we'll be there. We'll also be in Photoshop World in Orlando at the end of this month. So we were out this is Red Rock Canyon, which is about 20-25 minute drive outside of Las Vegas. And it's a cool shot. I really enjoyed it. This was taken with my 70-200 at, I think, 200 millimeter, shot wide open at an aperture of 2.8. And the reason why I did that was because I wanted my plane of focus to be very, very slim, so you can see a bit of the foreground if we zoom in a bit. So this foreground here is out of focus, and then you can see it's only maybe a foot and a half wide. That's your plane of focus. So that's just a quick lesson on aperture. The wider your aperture, the narrower this plane of focus was. So if this was shot with a 2.0 or a 1.4, this would be even slimmer, and I'd run the risk of maybe Jacob's hands being out of focus and his face being in focus, or vice versa. So if you're shooting with a lens that can open up to a wide aperture, you'll want to make sure. This is especially important for those of you who are portrait photographers and you're shooting, say, with a very popular 50 millimeter 1.4 lens. You want to make sure that you want to be very, very confident in your ability to know, based on your distance from your subject, that at 1.4 or 2.8, you will get your subject in focus. There's nothing, I think, a bigger bummer with a portrait shot than having one eye in focus and the other eye out of focus because the head was tilted slightly. So that has nothing to do with applying textures, but I kind of wanted to drop that little nugget because it's burned me many a time. And I don't even shoot portraits that much. So here's Jacob doing his little, I don't know, prayer for a relief from the 113-degree heat that we had that day. And let's go into PhotoFrame. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to apply some textures in PhotoFrame, and then we're going to drop out of well, I'll cancel out because I've got the layers already there. It just will save us some time. So again, I look for reason. I look for a purpose. So let me just close out of the library for a second. The point here is I want to do something to the background doesn't interest me much. I want to kind of do something to cover the background. So let's go back to the library, and we'll go back to textures. And again, we can go through and find a texture that works. So we're going to go to scratched film. And Jack, I see your question. I'll answer it once we're done with this. It's a good question. So let's go to scratched film. And so I'm looking over here at these various textures, and right away this one pops at me. And the reason why it pops at me is because the texture is pointing downward. So it's giving me and giving the viewer a visual cue that look down, go down. Even though it's very apparent that Jacob is sitting here in the middle of the frying road, I want some sort of visual cue. This is what I mean by when I apply texture, which again, I do not do very often, but I see a lot of people doing it. And I want to just give you an idea that it's not just a take it or leave it. You don't have to slap it on. Give some sort of methodology. So we can hit an add frame, and you can see it comes through. Now we're free to do various things. The first thing I want to do is adjust the color. And so, I can start going here and just looking for something I like. And I actually do like it with this kind of earth tone, maybe a little bit darker. Yeah, something like that looks pretty cool. Maybe even a little bit darker. Yeah, that's good. I like that. Now, the next thing that I can do is, if you want to get really funky, I'm talking about really funky, you can go in and we can go back into the library. And again, under the texture overlays, we can go to this text column. And you can see that we've got all these different elements that we can overlay in terms of text. And so we can scroll through and find one that kind of works for this particular image. And so I was scrolling through all these different texts, and some of them are okay, some of them are kind of weird. But this one right here, where is it? I think it was number 5. Yeah, I kind of like the way this font works for this image. And so what I can do is I can add the frame, and it adds this image here. It adds the text here. And actually, this is not the text I want. So I'm going to select this right here. You see how this layer is selected? I can hit the minus key to remove it. We can go back into the library, And the one that I want is this one. Let's hit add frame. Yeah, that's better. So this has more of a kind of a um, Sons of Anarchy, kind of like driving through the desert on your hog font. And what I can do is I can adjust the size of it here if I want. So if I want it to be, larger, I can do that. Or if I want to have more of the text, I can drop it in size. But in this case here, I want to bring it out big time. Now again, I can do this in Photoshop. I could use a free transform, which I might end up doing. And the other thing that I want to do is, again, use my color dropper. Don't forget that you've got this color dropper here, and you can kind of sample the colors. In this case here, I want something a little bit lighter than the scratched film to kind of have a little bit of contrast. So maybe something off the road would be good. It's kind of, you see, by having the same color, it all gets kind of mushed up together. So you want to kind of differentiate your two different textures. That's kind of good. I kind of like that. Maybe something slightly darker so you can see the edges of the font. That's kind of cool. David asked the question that I was waiting for, the question that gets brought up every single time I show this filter. The question is, can you create your own text as an overlay? The answer is yes and no. No, in the part that you can't take this overlay and change the text. It's as is. What you can do is create a file in Photoshop and basically whatever size you want. We can actually test it out. I've never done it. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some fun and we're going to do this on the fly. I've never done it, but we'll create a document, we'll type in text in black, and we'll import it into PhotoFrame. Cool. I actually like that. Good call, David. I was waiting for someone to ask that question, and for some reason, when it was asked on the first iteration of this series, I didn't even think about creating one on the fly. So you guys win. Now, we'll hit cancel because I'm not going to do anything here. I've got them in PhotoFrame, or in Photoshop, rather. So here's our image again. Now let's turn on the first texture. So you can see the texture is right here, and I've got it here. And what I'm going to want to do is select the mask here, and I just want to mask out, we'll make sure we have black selected. I want to mask the texture out of Jacob. And it always feels weird drawing on my good buddy, but, I'm sure he understands. So let's just get through here. I like the texture everywhere else. And again, we can go to the layer itself and then go create an adjustment layer for levels. If I want it to be darker, I can just bring it out more. I can also adjust the midtone to be darker. But you see how Jacob's not being affected? Because we mask that effect off of him. So he's not being touched. So if we want it to really pop off and have him almost kind of with this glow, we can do that. Can you do a drop shadow in the text as well, Bob? No, you can't because it's not a text layer. It's an actual graphic. It's an image overlay. So it's not, each individual letter is not its own textual element. So you can't use a style like that. If you want, you can do it when we create one, which we'll do after this. We can add the shadow there. So that's when we can do it. Now let's activate the text layer. And again, we'll go to the layer mask and just mask it off of Jacob. And I sometimes, with a text layer, I mask out even around him just because I don't want it. I want there to be somewhat of a visual border. So you see how, and we want to get rid of all the text that's on him because it doesn't really it doesn't make sense visually. So I'm just kind of finishing this up. Now we can do the inside. I'm using a Wacom Intuos 4 tablet right now, which is my favorite little thing in the world, next to my camera and my wife and my two dogs. Okay. And you can keep um, masking this out. But like I said, what we can do now is we can go to the layer itself, go to Edit, Free Transform, and let's zoom out a bit. We can drag this down if we want. You see where we can actually move it around, or we can make it bigger. But it's not making the font bigger or larger, rather. It's just expanding the actual image. And then when you're done, you'll hit checkbox, Command 0 to fit the screen. And again, if we want, we can create another adjustment layer and make it darker, just a mid-tone. That doesn't work because you're starting to see the mask that we masked out, so be careful there. And there we go. So let's try this. Let's see what the image size is. Let's go to the background here. Image size. All right, 3622, 5432. Actually, let's just do 3000 by 2000. That's fine. And we'll do grayscale. Background content is white. So we create a new image. Actually, scratch that. Let's make it opposite. New. We'll do the width of 2000, the height of 3000. Okay. Now let's take a text layer and let's just choose a font like, I don't even know what. Century Gothic? No. Let's do this engrave, MT. Okay. Let's make it big. That's way too small. So let's make it massive. Like 300 points. No. 200. 150. There we go. Okay. 150 points. So test, test, test. Copy, paste. So you see what I'm doing? I'm just kind of creating this. Now what I can do is, I wonder if I can transform this now. Ooh, kind of cool. I didn't think that would work. See, sometimes it's fun just playing around. Now to the point here, what we can do is we can go to, if I remember correctly, let's let's go to layer prop, blending options rather, and let's do a drop shadow, and let's select it, and the distance, let's make it. So here's your drop shadow. So this was back to Bob's question, can you do a drop shadow in the text? So we're creating the layer here. And let's make it a little spread. Okay. Now let's hit OK. So here's our awful text layer that says test 1,000 times with the drop shadow, and it's in black. Let's save this on the desktop. So let's just go to the desktop, and we'll save it as test text, and we'll change it as to a JPEG. We don't want layers. We want it to be a JPEG. Done. Hit save. We don't need it. We could just do 5. It doesn't have to be very high in quality. Hit OK. Now, let's go here. Let's turn these layers off. Here's a cool little trick. I don't know if you guys know this. I found this out by accident a little bit ago, but if you have a bunch of layers and if you press and hold the mouse key on one of the eyes and drag up, it'll activate them or it'll toggle them. So let's say I want to turn these off. I just drag up and it turns them off. So it's kind of cool. Instead of just clicking, 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 you could just drag up and toggle. So that's a cool trick. All right, so let's bring this image into PhotoFrame. And let's import that text layer. And I think this should work. We'll do two different things. PhotoFrame. The first way is we'll just get it into PhotoFrame, into the library. So let's go to File, Import Frame. We're in the library, and let's go to the desktop, and we'll do test text.jpg. Let's hit choose. Then we'll hit OK. OK. Now let's just search for test. There it is. So there we go. Now we can add the frame. Because the background was white and the text was black, this is important. If you did black as your background and white as your font, you would have punch outs of the test. You would only see through the words. So black will appear, white will be hidden. Important to know. So you can see now that we can go ahead and again use the tools of PhotoFrame. Hit apply. Let PhotoFrame do its thing. So this is how you get your own text into PhotoFrame. And you can, again, you change the font, you change the style of it, that's fine. But the point is, because it's a JPEG, you can't do anything after the fact. It's just an image like any other image. So here's the frame. And again, we go to the mask, and we mask it out of Jacob. And, you can see where I'm going with this. Again, we can hit backslash to see what we've done. Just get this. And now we've done our own custom text layer, which we can go to the layer, we can go to adjustments. And I always like to do this, just darken it up after the fact. But again, you want to be very careful that you're going to see the masks show through, so just make sure that you blend it. And in this case here, let's say you really like this dark look. Just go back to the mask, change from black to white, and paint not here, rather here, and paint the mask back in. But be careful, again, you run the risk of painting it, so it's the whole vicious circle. Two of you are asking to show you again how we got that into the library. Sure. We're going to do it a different way, though. Let's turn this off, or let's just delete this whole layer, and we'll go back into PhotoFrame. I did go through that a bit fast, so I apologize. But we'll take care of you guys. No worries. So here is, let's say, the first way I showed how to get the text layer, I just basically, this is for Jan and for Glenn. In the library, so when you launch PhotoFrame, you automatically go to this library. If you go to File, Import Frame, and select it, just navigate to that file that you created. So again, we went to Photoshop, we created a blank document, and we typed our text in. You want to make sure that the text, the style of the text, the font of the text is final. It's what you want it to look like. And then we saved it as a JPEG. I can import this, and PhotoFrame will import it. And then to find it, I just typed the file name, which was test, and then test text.jpg. So it's here, and I think it's under the user tab. Yeah. So you have a user tab that will be created after your first import. So I also imported my logo. So you can see if you want to put your logo as a watermark using PhotoFrame, you can add that to your frame. We can rotate it left by 90 degrees, and then we can adjust the size of it. So here, I'm just going to adjust the size of my logo to make it proportionate. There we go. Now I can position it somewhere right over Jacob's head. And there you go. So that's another thing you can use PhotoFrame for, is to get your logo in there. But again, it'll only be black and white. Let's get rid of the logo for a second, and let me show you how to get, let's say we're going to take the exact same text layer here, but let's say you want it to appear under texture overlays and text. Let's say you want it to be in this category. To get it in this category, if you notice, you see how each file or each texture has its own file. It's texture underscore text underscore number dot frm. What we want to do is scroll to and this can go into any category. You can put it in here if you want in the clouds, but it makes sense to put it in the text. So if we scroll to the bottom, I take a note. It's texture underscore text underscore 20 is the last one. So what I can do is go to my Finder, go to the desktop, and rename this. Now the way to do this is important. This is very important, and this is for Mac and PC. On a Mac, you can hit Command I, which is get info. So Command I will get the info of the file. And then I want to change this, the entire name and extension, to texture underscore text underscore 21 dot frm. It's important that you get the next sequence of numbers, because remember 20 was the last number in that list. So we're doing 21, and it has to be .frm for frame. And then we'll hit close. And it changes. If you just double click it to change the file name, it will not change. On a Windows machine, what you want to do is right click on the file. So you'd right click and you'd go to show properties. And there you would change the file. It won't work if you just rename it. You want to make sure that you're in the properties to change the extension as well from .jpeg to .frm. Now what we can do is go into the library, go to File, Import Frame, select this texture underscore text underscore 21, choose, hit OK, and now if we scroll to the bottom, there's 21. It's in line in this category because we had the same file name. So that's what you would do to get yours into the category. Again, it'll work in any category. Texture underscore holiday underscore 3.frm. Let me see if there are any questions. There are some questions, so let me just go over them right now. Amalia is asking whether you can get the levels layer to affect the texture or test layer. Yeah, you can do adjustment layers on each individual component. So you could do it on the text layer and the texture layer individually. That's what I was doing before. When you get a chance, can you repeat the Control 0 trick? The Control 0 trick is just, let's close out of here and let's cancel. So here we're in Photoshop. Let's say you zoom in a lot and you're working around, and now you want to see the whole image. You want to fit it to screen. On a Mac, it's Command 0. On a Windows machine, it's Control 0. It just fits the image to the screen. That's all. If you zoom out, same thing. Command Control 0. And this shortcut works in Photo Tools and in PhotoFrame. It just fits it to screen. It's a universal shortcut. Peter, you're absolutely right. This would work the exact same way if you imported your own clouds as an overlay. It would work with anything that you import. So it's just a matter of getting it's just a matter of getting the right elements into PhotoFrame. Is there a way to keep PhotoFrame open while in CS5 and drag and drop? No. PhotoFrame takes over Photoshop when you use it, so you can't work in. If you attempt to work in Photoshop, here you'll get an error, or you get a warning. And I'll show you. So here we're in PhotoFrame. You can see that we're in PhotoFrame because there's an icon. If we go to Photoshop, you get this window that says PhotoFrame is running outside of Photoshop. If you hit cancel, it'll quit PhotoFrame. To get back into PhotoFrame, just select the icon. So you can't work in Photoshop while in PhotoFrame. Can you use other formats like TIFF or RAW to import frames? No, they have to be JPEGs or .FRMs. Can you do the same type of thing with photo tools? Nope. You cannot import your own. You can't. You can import effects, absolutely. You can. No, I'm sorry, scratch that. You can import presets into PhotoFrame or into Photo Tools, but you cannot create your own effects and import them into Photo Tools. We control the effects. Can I use this as a multiple image by this process? I assume you mean by batch processing? Yeah, you can do batch processing. You can apply, say, this layer to 20 different images by going to, we'll hit cancel, and if you go to File, Automate, and then go to PhotoFrame, a Professional Edition batch, you'll be able to specify um, the folder with the images and then what you want it to apply. Can I repeat how to save the FRM in Windows? Yeah, just take the JPEG file, right click on it, and select Show Properties. I believe it's the last item on the contextual menu. And then in there, you see, I have a virtual copy of Windows here, but I don't know how well it'll work. What is it, VMware? VMware Fusion. So what I can do is launch my virtual copy of Windows 7 right now, and we can go into there. Leave me alone with the registration. So let's look at other questions while this is working. You want to be sure. Okay, so Michael brings up a really great point. Depending on what version of PhotoFrame, if you upgrade from an older version of PhotoFrame to a newer version, it's possible that it will remove your custom frames. If you want to make sure that you preserve them, do this. Let's go into PhotoFrame here, and this works in Mac and PC. To preserve and back up your frames, we're in the library. Go to File, Open Preset Folder, and then you can back up these presets. And you'll want to make sure that you have your user stuff saved as a preset. And that's how you would do it. And you can import a frame like I showed you, and you can save a preset, which is a combination of frames and effects. Okay, let me see if Windows has launched. Go away, McAfee. Oh, it doesn't even let me go away. Fine. Let's cancel out of here and let's bring that image into the text image. Let's hide this. Cancel. All right. There we go. Let's rename this to text.jpg. Okay. Bring it in here. All right. So there's text. Now here it's important. This is why you see how it says text. You don't see what the extension is, and you can toggle that. Right click. Oh, it's just properties. That's what it is. Go to properties, and here you want to type texture underscore text underscore 21.frm and hit OK. And now that is an actual FRM file. Because if you just did it without when it said text, I think it's just a text. If you just changed it to texture underscore text underscore 21.frm, it would be actually .frm.jpg, and it wouldn't recognize in the category. So you want to make sure that you right click and go to properties. So there you go. That's how you would do it in Windows. Let me just see what we have for. um, Let me see. Good question. Reba asks, so this, let's say we have this as text.jpg or texture underscore text, and we import it. Do we have to keep this file here? No, it brings a copy of it. It imports a copy of it, so you can delete this file and it'll retain in the library, so you don't need to worry about that. Uh, Can the color of the texture or other frames be changed? Donald asks, as well as just having options of black and white for your edges. You can change the color by using that color dropper in PhotoFrame, but in order for it to preserve transparency, so that only the text appears and not any background information, you'll want to make sure that you have it white. If you start adjusting shades of gray, it'll be semi-transparent. Do the textures have to be renamed when importing them? You have to rename them only if you want them to appear in the predefined categories that we have. If you just import it as text.jpg, it'll appear in your user category, which gets created after you import your first file. Um, Correct, Herman. You would use that import process. Let's say you upgraded from an older version of PhotoFrame and you wanted to restore your backed up frames or your backed up presets. You would use that import process to get them into the newer version of PhotoFrame. That's correct. Um, Alan asks, so the new texture name sequence will be category underscore file name dot frm. Yeah, you want to the safest way, Alan, to know what where what the file name should be is just go into PhotoFrame. We'll go into the library when it loads, and then you see above each element. It's not below. Sometimes if you're looking at this and you think acid burn 7 is this one right here, it's not. It's actually acid burn 5. So again, file names above the thumbnail. So let's say I want to put the image under layouts wedding for instance. Or actually no, it would be under texture overlay rather. And I want to put it under holiday. You would see texture underscore holiday underscore 1 2. So 2 is the last one. So you would do texture underscore holiday underscore 303.frm. Let me go back to Jack's question. Jack's question came up when we were talking about aperture and lenses, and I said how the 50 millimeters is one of the most popular ones. And Jack asked, why wouldn't you want to use an 85? You most certainly could. 85 is really nice for getting good compression in a person's face, but depending on the lens that you have, the 50-1.4, I'd have to look up on prices, but the 50 millimeter 1.4 for both Canon and Nikon is pretty reasonably priced. I know with Canon makes an 85-1.2, which is one of the fastest lenses Canon currently makes, if not the fastest, and that's extremely expensive. So it depends. Part of it has to do with budget, which is why I think a lot of people have the 50-1.4. Also, the 50 millimeter on a full frame sensor, gives you a nice focal length, but also putting it on a cropped sensor gives you a little bit more, the impression of more of a reach, even though there's no magnification going on. So it was just more of a kind of a subjective biased comment that I made. 85 is a beautiful lens as well.